I really hope this is the shot, that this is the one. Hi, I am Andrea. I am a Latina in a higher education graduate program, and I am a Latina in HESA. And we will get straight to it because I need to get to this. But before we jump in, so I have been talking about this patent text that we use in class. It's like our required text essentially, and I wanted to make sure that I'm giving the proper title, authors, so that it's available and that I'm not butchering it. So we are using 2016's Student Development in College, Theory, Research, and Practice, the third edition. It's Patton, Wren, Guido, and Quay. I hope I'm pronouncing all of those correctly. This is our kind of like our guiding text. It's not a required text, it's a recommended text. And we do use it. I really like that my professor has the way that he has structured our class and our readings is that we take like the the most not important, but like we take specific parts of the text that explain in depth what theory we're talking about, and then he'll use scholarly journals to have us understand how these theories are being applied and practiced for both research purposes and application purposes. So that is our recommended text for our class. Again, it is 2016's Student Development in College, Theory, Research, and Practice, Patton, Wren, Guido, Quay, again, 2016 version. So with that being said, girls, I'm not even sick anymore. I just it's snowing outside. I just got back from an on-campus interview yesterday, so I'm kind of like all over the place, but I really want to get this video done so that we can get to the next one. And so today's theory, so the way that my professor has structured this class, we are using three specific theories as kind of like our foundational theories to look at other identity development theories for college students. So the first theory that we looked at was RMMDI, the revised multidimensional model of identity development. We then looked at Baxter McGolda's self-authorship theory, and now we're looking at Bronfenbrenner's the patent text calls it Developmental Ecology. My professor calls it Ecological Systems Theory. I think either or works. So I'm probably going to be calling it Ecological Systems Theory because that's what my professor that's how he addresses this theory. So I think for me, this particular theory, I'm not saying it's an easy theory by no means, but I think because of my background, my academic background in feminist theory and looking at systematic systematic oppression, looking at how systems impact individuals and groups of people, I feel like this theory was kind of like the comprehension behind this theory for me was a little bit more not necessarily accessible but digestible. And so at least part of it, the part that we're going to get to, like the systematic part of it, was like, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense. In the text, Patton et al. Describe this theory as a four-component person-environment theory of development that higher education scholars have adopted. So even though it is a four-component theory, in my class, we are really looking at two out of those four components, because my student development theory class is so far at least, is very focused on looking at context and how context having us as practitioners, student affairs practitioners, evaluate the context to better understand which theory would be best applied with this context that is given to us. So, but for the sake of this video, and for my own understanding too, I think it is important to talk about all four components. Just knowing, but knowing that like I am probably going to focus more so on the last two rather than the first two. I the one of the things that also stood out to me in with this particular theory that really, again, I feel like it's not that I was necessarily using this theory because I didn't know it, but rather I feel like I've been using the context of what this theory is getting at. And the first sentence under developmental ecology in the patent text says, ecology models explain the processes but not the outcomes of human development. And so in higher education context, this means it, again, in the patent text, it states, it provides a way to understand how students interact with campus environments to promote or inhibit development. So the way that I understand that is that we are thinking about, I think specifically in residence life, we are thinking about not just like the quote unquote development. Like development exists in context. And context also means like the physical environment, as well as like the personal interactions and like the academic knowledge of learning. There was a part that that really made sense to me. Ecological systems consider how to shape campus environments to promote optimal growth and development for diverse student populations. So I think for me as a residence life professional, I'm constantly thinking about physical campus environments, even thinking about how the language of our physical environments, right? We go from thinking about, dorms and dormitories, and students and residents, not even residents, students living in dormitories, to we are now having residents living in residence halls, right? That language informs the lens through which not just professionals but also students understand what is happening in a residence hall, what is happening in a quote unquote dormitory. A dormitory is for sleeping, it's very passive. A dormitory is not lively. There's not much going on in a dormitory, whereas a residence hall is very active. A residence hall is very much alive. And that physical environment of a residence hall is an extension of the learning that is happening inside and outside of the academic classroom. So when I read that, I was like, oh yeah, like this makes complete sense to me. Like I think that it's very easy, or it could have been very easy to look at like ecological systems and kind of think like, biology, or think like more like STEM science. But I think that when we think about ecological and then thinking about like the ecology and thinking about like the environment, that's what we're getting at with this theory. So again, Patton et al. Describe, well, they not them, but rather Bronfenbrenner introduces this theory, and it has four components. The four components are as follows. They are process, which is the first component, person is the second component, context is the third component, and time is the fourth component. So PPCT. And I would say that the order matters because it builds upon one another, at least from my understanding of this theory. So as I mentioned earlier, in my class, we're really more so looking at the two out of the four components. We're really invested in context, the component of context, and we're looking at the component of time. the component of process and person, like we obviously read about it, but we are more so discussing the components of context and the component of time. However, I do think that it's important for me to kind of like discuss a little bit what process and person really mean. I think that the most important part about process as a component, and being that according to the theory and according to Bronfenbrenner, this is like the core of the model, that it's encompasses particular forms of interaction between organism and environment called proximal processes that operate over time and are posited as the primary mechanisms producing human development. This is Bronfenbrenner and Morris, 2006. That is a mouthful. Really, I think what is like the takeaway from that is that the process of the component of process helps us understand how, as a student affairs practitioner, that we want to make sure that the processes that a student is going through are, as mentioned in the text, buffered appropriately as to not overwhelm the developing individual. The biggest thing with process, again, is this idea of like proximal processes. The way that I understand it is like we are creating like safe spaces for students to be challenged. And I know that sounds kind of like an oxymoron, but it's about creating spaces and opportunities that are challenging, but that are not that the challenge is not outweighing the development of the student. That's my understanding. So, and again, we don't really get into process a lot in my class, so I'll leave it at that. The second part of the second component of this theory is the person. And I think the first time I read this, I was like, I don't really understand this. I'm gonna be so honest. I was like, what does this mean? And even and the reason that I can confidently say that we're more so looking at context and time rather than process and person was because I mentioned this in my class. I was like, hi, like I don't really understand the person part, the developmentally investigative characteristics. I don't understand. So this doesn't mean I ignored them. It more so means that I've come back to it now with fresh eyes after having more conversation and discussion about the ecological systems theory. And I think that I'm able to better understand that this component is literally saying, or excuse me, not literally, but this component is stating that a person's a person's attributes can influence how they can influence the environment that they're in, and also how the environment affects them. Like essentially that, yeah. So I'm reading from my notes. The developmentally instigative, is that how you pronounce? Yes. Developmentally instigative characteristics influence how individuals experience environments and vice versa. So the way that I think about it is that you can create an environment that is safe, that is this, that is that, but if a person is not innately understanding or receiving it in that way, like it doesn't matter that the environment has been set up in a certain way for them. And I think that's the best way for me to understand the other part. So there are 4 types of developmentally instigative characteristics. And I think now that I understand that the person component is literally like, and sorry, I didn't mean literally, that's kind of how I talk. But that the person component is more so stating that a person literally, that a person's that a person's innate being can is a part of the influence, that the person's innate being can determine how an environment is received, and what the environment receives from that person, from that individual. um, and as I'm rereading this particular passage on a person, I'm starting to better understand that uh, when we talk about students being high achieving, for example, or students needing more support, students who may be more engaging than others. We are talking about these developmentally instigative characteristics. We're talking about students and and how they are coming into the college campus, and how I don't want to say ready, but um, how innately they are to receive and give to the college campus environment. So that's, again, process and person. We um, we didn't really dive into as much, I think, because I think my professor wants us to understand ecological systems theory specifically in the context of what the context component of what ecological systems theories bring. So this is where it gets like, this is where my brain starts understanding this theory more. So the context is is we're breaking down context of a student by different levels. Here they're called 4 levels of context. So there is a microsystem level, there's a mesosystem level, there's an exosystem level, and a macrosystem level. I think this is really helpful to understand that context. It is not just like super vague and like all encompassing, that we can break it down a little bit more to better understand how context is affecting a student's meaning making filter. So the microsystem is essentially the so we have the student, right? And then this context is happening outside of the student. The students' microsystems are the relationships that they're engaging in, the roles that they have taken on, whether that be like a student leadership role, or whether that be like, you know, a caregiver role, you know, big sister, big brother, little sister, little brother, little sibling, kind of any almost like title that they may have, or activity that they engage in. That's a microsystem. And then with this theory, we keep expanding to understand that those microsystems are engaging with one another as well, and that sits, those microsystems sit within the mesosystem level. The mesosystem is where is a, I really liked how it was mentioned here in the patent text. The mesosystem is the synergy of ideally the synergy of all these microsystems that are happening, or rather all these microsystems that are engaging with one another through that student. Then we keep expanding this context to the exosystem, which is where policies and institutions affect the student's mesosystem and microsystem. So again, the student is at the core, and then outside of them are their different microsystems, and then those microsystems are within the mesosystem, and the interaction of those different microsystems. And then the exosystem is the like the different policies and institutions that affect the mesosystem and those microsystems, and the student itself, the student themselves. I think this for me was when I started to better understand like the ecological part of the ecological systems theory. We're looking at in the patent text, we talk about like financial aid policy, faculty curriculum, the workplace of the parents or guardians of the student. So that's the ecosystem is policy and how that affects the other contexts. And then within all of that is the macro system, and that's essentially society, history, culture, the way that we're all kind of engaging with one another, and how, again, that macro system affects the student. And this is all happening with the fourth component of time. So all of these systems, all of this context is happening through the component of time. And specific, and I think that with us working with college students, we're thinking about, we receive first year students, whether they be traditional or non-traditional first year students, to their sophomore year, their junior year, their senior year, sometimes their fifth year, or sometimes even their sixth year. That time frame really impacts how a student's environment can affect their own development. So that's like the big thing about the ecological systems theories, at least from my understanding and the way that we're looking at it in classes, that we're talking about the context, we're talking about these different levels of context, the microsystem, the mesosystem, the exosystem, and the macro system, and that this can influence how we think about how a student is developing. Not necessarily how they have developed, but rather how these levels of context will or can, be influential in their development, in their physical environment. So I hope this was helpful. I hope that that this made sense. I think that, again, for me, the context part really makes sense because of my own academic background, but I'm happy to answer more questions, or walk through this in a way that is more maybe better informed for anyone who is taking student development theory and wants to talk more about this particular theory. So that's what I have for today. I have officially gone through the three foundational theories that we're using for my student development theory class. My next video is on identity development, or specifically racial identity development. And then once I do that video, I will be all caught up. And I'm excited to get more into the different identities that we'll be talking about in class. We are starting to work on our final projects, and I'm gonna ask and see if I can post my final project on YouTube because I'm really excited to talk about that. So thank you so much for watching, and please share with another higher ed student, or another higher ed professional, because I would love to hear what they think of this theory and the other theories that I've talked about on my channel. Bye.